Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Sadi Bet. This week's learning is sponsored by Glenn Miller and Ruth Rotenberg in memory of their daughter Taniel Miller's 19th yahrzeit. This year, embodying Taniel's passions, the Taniel Miller Foundation has blossomed into a hub for over 6 initiatives in Israel, from civilian first responders to organizing ER doctors from around the world, all to support our victory in Israel. Yachad Nenatzach. May the learning through Hadran be a zchut for a swift and safe recovery and healing for Am Yisrael. Today's daf is sponsored by Deborah and Michael Dixon on the occasion of their daughter Ella's bat mitzvah this Shabbat. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started. A very interesting daf, mostly agadatot, kind of not agadatot of the story meaning, but in all sorts of interesting statements and where they are derived from. But the first part of our daf, we're going to finish up first the issue of the fruit trees and what kind of under what circumstances are we allowed to cut fruit trees? Theoretically, we're really not allowed to cut fruit trees. And in fact, we ended with this very strong image of maybe perhaps trying to tell us why it's so important not to cut fruit trees. You might think, okay, what's the big deal? But by Rabbi Hanina, comparing it to the death of his son, I think what he's trying to say is that a child who's cut off before they've had children, which unfortunately we are privy to all too much in the last number of months in this country, but that is something everybody can understand. Well, that's similar to cutting a fruit tree before the fruits have grown, and there you can try. It can highlight how serious they view this issue. However, what we're going to see today is Amar Ravina, a few exceptions to the rule. So Amar Ravina, I'm now 4 lines from the bottom of Sadi Aleph Amud Bet. But if the wood is worth more than the fruits, let's say the fruits aren't so great from this tree, and the wood is a very important, valuable wood, then actually you could cut down the tree for the wood. Okay? Here's a Breishit to support it. It's a bit of a complicated Breishit to see how this exactly supports it, but we'll see. It's just there's different explanations of how really to understand it. The pasuk where it says you're not allowed to cut down fruit trees reads like this. Okay, it's Dvarim chapter 20, verse 2. Rak eitz asher teda, only, okay, we're going to darshan this word only at the end of the Breita, only a tree that you know, ki lo eitz ma'achalu, that it is not a fruit tree. Now, why did you have to say only a tree that you know is not a fruit tree? You just could have said a tree that's not a fruit tree, without the word only, without the words that you know. And then, ototashli, that's the only one you can destroy. If you need to build a wall to put up a siege around the city that you're fighting against, then you could cut down, according to this pasuk, only non-fruit bearing trees. So the Breita says, actually, it adds those extra words to say you actually could cut down a fruit tree. Seems weird. Didn't we just say you can't cut down a fruit tree? Well, we'll see. Okay, so we have 2 types that you could cut down. What does this mean? It means that if you're fighting a war and you need to build a wall around the city and there's nothing other than a fruit tree, then you can even cut down a fruit tree. So it's to protect you. So what it's saying is there are situations where you cut down a fruit tree if you need it. You don't have any other tree around. So now the Gemara says, the Breita says, eventually they're going to include, and as the pasuk is basically saying, you could cut down even fruit trees. So why does it say, so why does it seem to say, well, if it's not a fruit tree, well, what it's trying to tell you is if you have a choice, you should cut down the other tree, the one that's not a fruit-bearing tree. So now that didn't prove our point yet. But it says here, Yachol afilu me'uleh b'damim. Now, the me'uleh b'damim here doesn't mean the same thing in our thing. We were trying to prove me'uleh b'damim. That's what's a little tricky here. Some people sort of try to explain it is. But I think the simple reading of the Breita is like this. What if the non-fruit-bearing tree is actually more expensive worth more than the fruit-bearing tree? Then you can actually cut down the fruit-bearing tree. If the value of the non-fruit-bearing tree is greater, why would that be? So now that's similar. Now, the difference between our cases, here we're comparing 2 different trees. Our case was the tree to itself. If the wood is worth more than the fruits, you could cut down the tree. Here it's the same thing. If the ilan, or similar, if the tree that doesn't bear fruit is more valuable than the tree that does, then you can it's actually the opposite, because One, it's more valuable, meaning you want the wood. This is more valuable that you don't want to cut it down because it's more valuable and you'd rather cut down the less expensive tree, which is the fruit-bearing tree. So then you could cut down the fruit-bearing tree also. So it's not exactly the same thing, but it is showing their exceptions to the rule and in a similar kind of way. Talmud lomar rak, and that's where you learn it from, the word only, right, or just, right, only this, that comes to limit to say, well, sometimes the rule is not in effect. Shmuel Aitile Arisa, we're now going to have two stories, and with that we'll end the section. Shmuel Aitile Arise Tmave, his sharecropper brought him a date. Achil tam behu tama dechamra. He ate it and it tasted like wine, sort of like grapes. So he was eating his date and it tasted like grapes. And he says, Amalei Maihai, he says, what is this date? What, like a mutant date? Amalei Beni Gufne Kaime. He says it's growing among the vine. So it must have gotten flavor from the grapes. So Amar Makashe Bachamra Kule Hai says, I can't believe this is ruining, right? If it tastes like the grapes, it must be taking nutrients from the grapes. It's going to ruin my grapes. Now, obviously, the grapes are producing wine, which is much more expensive than, they use dates for beer, and dates were good, but not the same value as wine. So that's ruining my vineyard. So tomorrow bring me its roots, meaning cut down this tree. The whole debate about why he said, give me the roots. Some people say that you could, okay, so first of all, what do you see? You could cut down a fruit-bearing tree if it's ruining something else that's more expensive. I had this in my garden. I had a shesek tree. I don't even know what that is in English. That just grew. A shesek must have fallen and it grew right next to my avocado tree. And I love my avocado tree and it was ruining my avocado tree. So I told the gardener I want to take it out. And he said, no, you can't. My non-religious gardener says to me, no, you're not allowed to do that. It's a fruit-bearing tree. So he said, well, he said, it's a problem. I said, but it's ruining my tree. If it's ruining my tree, you can do it. So some people say that, by the way, if it's ruining your tree, you can uproot it. But what? But you have to take it out with its roots and replant it somewhere else. And that's a way to permit cutting a fruit-bearing tree. So anyway, there's a debate about how to understand this, and that has effects halachically. Moving on. Rav Chitzka, Chazatali Begufne, he saw a little sapling of a date tree growing in his vineyard. Amarle Larise Akrinu. So he says to a sharecropper, uproot it. Why? And here he spells it out in a very kind of quip, a very nice quip, he says. Gufne kane dikle lo kane gufne. Okay, we're going to get to all sorts of quips coming up. So let's see. Gufne kane dikle, which means a vineyard can buy a date tree. Meaning, if I have a vineyard, I can make a lot of money from selling my wine, which means I can then buy another field and plant a new palm tree. But if I have dates, dikle, my palm tree is low kind of gifting, is not going to get me enough money to plant a vineyard. So basically, that's why I can cut my date tree to save my vineyard. New Mishnah. Now here we start to get off on, we've been talking this whole chapter about damages, and I damage you, I have to pay you damages, I have to pay you nezek, tzara, riposh, hevet, boshet, I have to, all these things I have to pay. Now, the question is that enough? And this Mishnah comes and says, that's on the monetary plane. But even though you pay this person damages, perhaps this is referring just to the boshet also. There's a debate, but I don't want to get into that right now. It's not so significant. For our purposes, but the fact is, you're not going to really be cleared until you ask for forgiveness. There's another whole playing going on here, right? Like they say, money doesn't buy you everything. It's very nice you pay the person back for the damages you caused them, but you ruin this relationship you have with this person, and until you ask for forgiveness, you haven't completed it. Now, there's a big debate here, and I think a really fascinating debate between Rashi and the Rava about whether this is, so Rashi basically says, that there's sa'ar that comes along with, he specifically talks about boshet, even though you humiliate someone and you pay for the boshet, but there's also the pain that comes along with the humiliation, right? Like if you think about now, PTSD, right? You could pay someone back and give them their house back, they were uprooted from their house and this and that, but they still have PTSD, from what happened. Let's say if we use October 7th as an example, that can't, you can give them all the money in the world, that's not going to help them get over that trauma from the event. So when it's somebody injuring someone else, there needs to be that forgiveness going on. That's Rashi. The Rava takes it a totally different place. He says, on the plane between human, between each other, okay, I pay. Oh, so by the way, in understanding Rashi, people compare it to a thief. A thief steals something, and then, they come to your house at night, they, ransack your house or whatever it is, they come in. It's an invasion of your private, right? Anyone who's had their house robbed says, it was a terrible feeling that someone could just come into your house. And, so even if you get back the money for what they stole, it doesn't take away that feeling of violation that could only, if the robber comes and says, listen, I was desperate for money. I really needed it. I'm so sorry. I feel so bad. Then maybe we could get past it. So that's one element. That's Rashi. The Rava says, no, between each other, you've worked it out. You paid them. You've done your thing. But b'dinei shamayim, you have an issue. In other words, God won't forgive you until you deal with it on the human relation plane, which is a fascinating look at things. That, in other words, it's so interesting. First of all, the Rambam talks about it, and he quotes this in Hilchot Tshuva when he talks about it. And there's a mission in Yomi that says a similar thing, which is, Yom Kippurim can atone for sins, ben adam lamakom, between us and God, but sins between man and fellow man, or human, women and fellow women, it doesn't help until you ask for forgiveness. So there's two ways to understand this. In other words, this is saying, it sounds like we have to work things out between each other. But the Rava says we have to work out these things for each other, for God's sake, not for our sake. We could have dealt with it. Money can buy everything, almost everything on the human plane. But in the heavens, they're not satisfied unless you do this element of forgiveness. Anyway, it's a super fascinating topic, but we're going to go on. The Mishnah says, where do we learn this from? Shene'emar, v'ata hashev eshet. Okay, they don't read you the rest of the pasuk. This is with Avimelech. If you remember, Avraham goes to Gerar and Avimelech. Oh, by the way, Shuli Mishkan wrote all about Gerar, which is interesting because Gerar is in the area that we call Gaza now. So, then also it was by Gaza. Anyway, so she wrote a whole article about the geography there, and which is very relevant to understand about the geography of Gaza. So anyway, that's today's article in Flashback. You can read it. But now what happens there? So Avram goes to Gerar, and there he comes with his wife, and he says, oh, right. So they start asking about your wife. Who is she? Your sister, your wife. So he says, oh, she's my sister. And then, Avimelech takes her, and then this plagues his town, his city, his area, and then nobody can give birth, and no one can get pregnant, and all sorts of things. So now, what happens here? Ata ashev eshet ha'ish ki navihu, v'yitpalel ba'adcha v'chayeh, v'mincha meshiv da ki mot tamut ata v'chol asher lach. Okay, so now he says, bring back eshet ha'ish, because, okay, now this is a weird thing. We'll get to this later. Because he's a navi. Okay, bring back Avram's wife because he's a prophet. V'yitpalel ba'adcha v'chayeh, and he will pray for you. Now, what do they say here? Avraham needs to pray for Avimelech. How is he going to pray for him if Avimelech just did this terrible thing and took his wife and almost slept with her, right? He didn't sleep with her, but almost slept with her. So what it means is that he has to ask for forgiveness from Avraham in order to get Avraham to the point where Avraham will pray for him. That's what God tells him. Make it so that Avraham will pray for you. So there we see the importance of asking for forgiveness. Uminayin, now the second thing the Mishnah says is meaningful. Now you have to look at the flip side. Now, you also learn from the story of Avraham and Avimelech that if Avraham doesn't say, I accept your apology, that he's cruel. Shene'emar, this is anyone. In other words, we're going to learn it from Avraham, but if Avraham wouldn't have accepted his apology, that it would have been cruel. And we don't really learn it. What they're basically saying is, use Avraham as your example for how you should act. If someone wrongs you and then asks for forgiveness, you should accept it, because look at Avraham. He accepted it. Shene'emar, v'yitpalel Avraham el Elohim, v'yirpaluhim et Avimelech. So Avraham prayed to God. In the end, he did. And then Avimelech was true. So you see that Avraham accepted his forgiveness. That's first section, which really we're going to deal with today in the rest of today's stuff. But the Mishnah continues on. This we'll deal with more tomorrow. And this is actually something we saw a long time ago. I'm not going to spend too much time on it today because we have a very long daf. But if someone says, blind me, cut my arm off, shabaret ragli, break my leg, chayav, and you do it, you're obviously liable. Just because they told you to do it, they didn't really mean it. Almanat liftor, if they say, and I will exempt you, you're still chayav. Don't believe them when they say that. If they tell you, tear my clothes, break my jug, you're also liable. But if they say, and if you do it, I will exempt you, then patur. Okay, the Gemara is going to have to say, what's the difference between that case and that case? Why are you exempt in the case of the object, but you're not exempt for the body? Bodily damage, we'll see that tomorrow. But if I tell Ruth, go do it to Naomi, and I will exempt you, meaning go tear Naomi's clothes, and I'll pay you back. Okay? No, it doesn't work. Ruth is liable. This is like I'm basically asking you to do something to somebody else. You're going to be liable because there's no agency for doing a sin. So that doesn't. Tanu Rabbanan. So now the Breishit is going to start with the Breishit. The Gemara is going to start with the Breishit that's very similar to the Mishnah. Kol elu sha'amru demei boshto, and here it really seems to be talking about just the boshet. All those payments that we said in the previous Mishnah, 400 for this, 200 for that, all the amounts, that's demei boshet. Aval tzaro, and this is where Rashi says, but the pain from the humiliation, afilu hevi kol elein vayot ba'olam, you can bring all the nicest animals in the world, einim chalo ad shevakesh mimenu. You're not going to be pardoned unless, you're not going to be completely done with this unless you ask for forgiveness. Shenema, hashev ashiv esh ta'ish kinavihu v'yitpalel ba'adchan. And they quote the Avimelech pasuk, same thing. Now they start questioning some other psukim in that, some other issues in that pasuk. Wait, kinavihu, return the wife of this man, Avraham, because he's a prophet? What do you mean? De'eshet navi ba'ayaduri, only because she was the wife of a prophet, is she supposed to be returned? Eshet acher lo ba'ayaduri, but if she wasn't married to a prophet, you wouldn't have to return her? That doesn't make any sense. You took someone else's wife, of course you have to return her. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, hashev eshet ha'ish mikom makom. No, of course you have to return anyone who is married to anybody, but dekamalta hagoy gam tzadik ta'arog halu hu amar li achotihi v'hi gam hi amra achihu. No, Avimelech's claim to God was, why are you punishing me? I'm a tzaddik. What did I do wrong? It was Avram's fault. He's the one to blame. He said it was my sister. I didn't know it was his wife. So to which he says, you're wrong. You're partly to blame. Navihu ukvar. Okay, he is a Navi. Why? What does it mean, a prophet here? It doesn't mean he was a prophet that had a prophecy from God, but he understood, he saw through your words. Kvarli made. Okay, they already say, when a guest comes to town, do you ask him, are you hungry? Do you want some food? Do you want some drink? Or do you ask him about his wife? Right? What's common etiquette? You walk into town, they start saying, oh, who's the woman with you? Is she your wife? Is she your sister? Right? That already, Avraham, by seeing you ask those questions, instead of asking, would you like some food? Would you like some drink? He saw right through you, and he saw that something was going bad here, and that he knew what kind of a person you were, and that's why he lied. In other words, from here you learn that Ben Noach gets killed because they didn't learn their lesson. In other words, Avimelech should have learned derech eretz. He should have learned how to speak. If he had spoken properly, Avimelech could have died from this. What happened? Well, he turned to God, and then God intervened, and God said, ask for forgiveness. He did. Avraham prayed for him, and he was saved. But theoretically, he could have died from this, and that's because he didn't learn how to speak properly. He should have figured out, he caused the whole, basically, what they're saying here is they're relieving Avraham of the responsibility, right? Which there's a whole debate, was Avraham wrong for doing this or right for doing this? But this source basically at least puts at least some of the blame, if not all the blame, on Avimelech. Ki atzor atzar Hashem. Okay, now we're continuing in Psukim there. And that was Pasuk Zayin. Later it says, Ki atzor atzar Hashem ba'ad kol rechem lebeit Avimelech al dvar Sarai eshet Avraham. Okay, basically, atzar, all their rechem, all their wombs were sealed. Okay, no one could have children. But why does it say atzor atzar? From here, they're going to get off on a drasha. What to do with this, I don't know. But Amar Rabbi Elazar, shtei atzirot halalu lama. Why does it say atzor atzar twice? Echat beish shechvat zera, shtayim beisha shechvat zera v'leida. There was one for the men and two for the women. Two types of atzirut. Atzirut is closures, right? Where something was blocked. There were blockages. So I assume the atzor atzar, it's actually a little confusing here because we're going to see this one says 1 and 2. This next one's going to say 2 and 3. The double is one for men, one for women. Why it's one for the men and two for the women, I don't know, but they're going to basically say, for the men, it was their semen was blocked. Stein bisha, semen and birth. Now, women don't have semen, but some people say it's that the semen didn't come out of the body of the woman, which is part of, just the natural process. Some people say it's the semen counterpart in the woman, right? Which would be like their eggs weren't functioning. And Leda and women who were already pregnant weren't giving birth. But Manitatan and a Breishit, they say Shtayim B'ish, there were two in the man, Shechvat Zera Uktanim. There were two things. One had to do with sexual relations and reproduction. One had to do with bathroom issues. So Ktanim means urinating. So they stopped urinating. Shlosha B'isha, Shechvat Zera Uktanim B'leidan. For the woman, it's the same two before, and then they add also, she was stopped up, she couldn't go to the bathroom. Urinate. Ravina Amar, we're going to add one more. Bathroom related, shalosh b'isha shechvat zera uktanim upitabat, and shalosh b'ish shechvat zera uktanim upitabat. We're going to add constipation. Arba'a b'isha shechvat zera v'leida uktanim upitabat, and we're going to add also the constipation to the woman. Okay, there were basically a lot of issues going on here for the people of Avimelech. Different opinions about to what extent. Ba'ad kol rechem. Why do we add those words? For all the wombs, like it just gives in ba'ad rechem. What all the wombs? Even the hens weren't laying eggs. Okay, that's how far this punishment went that God gave. Okay, now we're going to start with, we're going to have 16 questions, 15 today, one left for tomorrow, that Rava asked Raba bar Meri. The similar structure to almost all of them is that, okay, first, in all of them, Rava is going to ask a question to Raba bar Meri, and it's going to be relating to psukim in some way. There's really one that's just kind of, what does this pasuk mean? All the rest are, where do we get the following thing from? Either that the rabbi said, what's their source for it in the Torah, or that people say on the street, like there's this common adage that people say, where does it come from? And then they're going to quote a pasuk. In many of the cases, Raba bar Meri is going to answer him, because he's always going to answer him. But in many of the cases, Rava comes and says, oh, you want to learn from there? I can learn it from somewhere else. Why he asked the question in the first place. So it was a good question, right? He wanted to see what Rava bar Meri had to say, and then he pulls out his own pasuk. So that's where we're going. How did we get here? Because you'll see the first one comes from Avimelech and Avraham. Rava bar Meri. Minah milta da amar Rabban. And where do we get the back what the rabbis say? So here, the first one is what the rabbis say. If you plead for mercy for your friend, and you need the same thing, you will get answered first. So Raba bar Meri answers him, not yet connect to Avimelech. It's from Eov. It says that Eov got back all the things that God took away from him because he prayed for his friends. Okay, his friends also had some things going on. If you remember, there's the famous friends of Eov that come up in the book, and they all start talking to him. They say all sorts of, some of it a bit horrifying, things they say to him, it's all your fault, blah, blah, blah. Okay, they're not always looked upon the most fondly in the book, but anyway, they also had some things going on, and because he prayed for them, then God helped him. So Rava says to him, you say from there, I have a better pasuk. Vayitpalel Avraham el Elohim. Now he prayed. Now what was the problem? They couldn't have babies. So Avraham prays for Avimelech, Vayirpal et Avimelech et ishto v'amotav. And then God cures Avimelech and his wife and his amot. Uchtiv Hashem pakaret Sarah kasher amal. And then it says, and God heard Sarah's prayers, right? And now it says, it doesn't say he heard Sarah's prayers. Sorry, I said that wrong. Hashem pakaret Sarah. He remembered Sarah and the fact that she couldn't have children. Remember, Avraham and Sarah couldn't have children for many years. Kasher amal. Now, the word in the pasuk there, kasher amal, right? This is immediately after the Avimelech section. So it says, kasher amal, and bayas Hashem l'Sarah kasher diber. So first of all, there's kasher amar and kasher diber. And we assume it means like God had promised. Remember, he said when the angels came. But the kasher amar, that's kasher diber. Kasher amar, they say, is a reference to Avraham. Kasher amar, Avraham and Avimelech. When Avraham had told Avimelech, had prayed for Avimelech on account of that. Okay, so we basically have that, yes, it's true. The pshat is like Hashem said, and like Hashem had promised when he sent the angels. But the drasha, and perhaps because of the double language, kasher amar and kasher diber, that it was on account of Abraham's prayers. So that's the first one. Number 2, when you pull out thorns, sometimes you accidentally pull out the fruit, the vegetable as well. Here it's the cabbage. Okay, the cabbage comes out sometimes when you're pulling out thorns. So what does this mean? It means that when there's bad that comes, sometimes it comes to good people as well. Okay, it kind of encompasses everyone around it. This is in Yirmiyahu. And God says, why are you fighting with me? All of you sinned, including, it sounds like, Yirmiyahu. Okay, so he gets included in the people and the bad that's going to come. Again, Rava says, what, you're learning it from there? I get it from here. Okay, this we read in last week's parsha in Beshalach, where people are complaining, and then God says to Moshe, you guys, including Moshe, including Aaron, what terrible thing are you doing that you're not doing my mitzvot and my Torah, even though they weren't, right? They were keeping it. It was just the people weren't, but they get included in the bad. This is the one that's a little bit different. This is really just, what is this pasuk talking about? Where are we? We're now going back to Joseph. Joseph brings his brothers to Egypt, and right when they go to settle after the whole thing, after he reveals himself, so then he says, come live here, things will be good here, and he brings them to Goshen, and he brings them to meet Paro, and he wants to convince Paro to let them live in the city of Goshen, the area of Goshen. So he says, and they took from his brothers, from the Katzeh, from the edge of his brothers, 5 people. What 5 people? Which 5 brothers? The ones that in the brachot that eventually, not at that point, hadn't happened yet, but in Vizot Bracha, when Moshe gives the blessings to the tribes, it's the ones whose names are mentioned twice in the context of the blessings. Okay, so usually they start out for this one, blah, 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 and then it says their name again in the description, like Baruch Marchiv God, I think of the words, but there's a bunch where basically, their names are repeated. The assumption is their names are repeated, again, this is a drasha, because they were weak. So he brought the 5 weakest brothers, the ones whose names are doubled, shows that they were weaker. Why did he bring the weaker ones? Because he didn't want Paro to say, oh, look at these strong guys, I'm going to draft them into my army. That was the real motivation. So now they have a problem, though. They say, Yehuda is nami, okay, so basically, Rabba Bar Meri answered, it's the 5 who were doubled. So he says to him, or the Gemara asks, also Yehuda, and he wasn't one of the 5. Yeah, there's 6. There's Yehuda. So how do you ignore him? His name was doubled for a different reason. We have a whole drasha. Now we're going to go off on a tangent. This whole thing wasn't a tangent. Tangent about Yehuda and what happened. Really, we're going to read this pasuk. Vizot li Yehuda. Okay, it's a little bit of a weird way of starting, and that's going to be where the drasha is going to start off. Vizot li Yehuda. Instead of giving him a bracha, he says, and this is for Yehuda. Vayomau. And he said, which is also weird, why there's any said. So we're going to see that this was a conversation between Moshe and God about Yehuda, and we'll talk about it in a minute in the drasha. Shama Hashem kol Yehuda. Here you have the doubling. It said Zot Yehuda and then kol Yehuda. So God heard the voice of Yehuda. Ve'elamotavi. And when he brought him to his nation, Yadav Rav Lo. Okay, he'll be able to fight with his hands. Ve'ezer mitzarav tiyeh. And he will win out over his enemies. So now we're going to see that every phrase in the sentence was something like there was something first that Moshe said to God, and then it was God's response. So let's see what happened here. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, Mai dichtiv Yechi Reuven ba'al Yamot v'yim etav mispar v'zot liyuda. Okay, right before this, the pasuk before is Reuven should live and not die, v'yim etav mispar, and then it immediately goes into v'zot liyuda. The 40 years they were in the desert, the bones of Yehuda were rolling over in their grave, in their coffin. Basically, they were carrying the coffin with him, and the bones were detached from the body and rolling around. And there was this basically means something was unsettled. Okay, like right, it's unsettling to have bones not in their place. There was something unsettled about Yehuda. So basically, this pasuk is going to be Moshe asking for mercy for Yehuda about all sorts of things. So first he starts complaining, why are the bones rolling around? Can't you fix this, God? And he says to God, Ribono Shalom, mi garam, and here we're going to talk about the juxtaposition of the Reuven v'zot li Yehuda. Mi garam the Reuven shiodeh Yehuda. who caused Reuven to admit, Migaram Reuven sheyodeh Yehuda, who caused Reuven to admit what he had done wrong? If you remember, Reuven switches the beds of the father to be in Bilhah's tent instead of in the other tent. And why did he do that? So I'm sorry, from Bilhah to, right? What was the story? He moved it from Yishkavet Bilhah Aviv. He moved it to his mother's tent. Anyway, who caused that whole thing? And that's who caused Reuven to admit what he had done? Yehuda. Okay, Yehuda caused it. Why? Because Yehuda admits with Tamar. If you remember, he says that Meri. From there, Reuven learned to admit his sin. So he should be rewarded for that. Miyad Shama Hashem Kol Yehuda. God heard the voice of Yehuda. That's the beginning part of the pasuk. Al Avrei L'Shafa. So the bones go into place. Great. What was the problem? No, wasn't enough. Lo Avakamas Kilamitim to Dirikia, but he didn't get up to the yeshiva in the heavens. Okay, so his bones got put into place, but he's still not where he's supposed to be. So, okay, sorry. It was from Leah's tent. Okay, I couldn't remember for some reason right now. Left my head. Thank you. He moved the beds from Leah's tent to Bilhah's tent. Thank you for correcting. Just got lost in my head there. Okay. Now, El Amotivienu. So then the pasuk says, I'll bring him to his nation. That meant he made it up to the heavens. He made it up to the yeshiva in the heavens. What was the problem, though? You can get to yeshiva, but not know what you're doing. That's what happened to Yehuda. Lo aviyata, my Kamma Rabbananu, l'mishkach mitra b'hadei Rabbanan, right? Take someone who's never learned Gemara before, throw him into a Beit Midrash full of people learning, they won't know what to say. So what happens? He gets up there, he has no idea what the rabbis are talking about, he can't join the conversation. Yadav Ravlo. So again, Moshe asks for mercy, and he's given that he has the power to fight now. He knows what he's talking about. But he still doesn't win because he might be able to argue, but not well enough to get the halacha paskin like him. And then that means he wins. Okay, so basically this is a process of Moshe asking for mercy for Yehuda until everything is totally settled. Anyway, that was all just to say why his name was doubled and he wasn't part of the fight. Moving on. Poverty follows the poor, right? That basically once you're poor, you just keep becoming more poor. This one's also a little different than all the others because he brings a Mishnah to prove it. Most of them are psukim in the Tanakh. When the rich people bring their first fruits to the temple, they bring them in these very fancy gold and silver vessels. The poor people in their very, basic wicker baskets. And what do? They give the baskets with the bikurim to the kohanim, so the kohanim have something to carry them in. But the rich people bring home their fancy vessels. So what do you see here? The rich people bring their rich items and they get to take them home. The poor people bring their poor stuff and then they get it taken away from them. So obviously they're going to keep, right, the poverty is going to keep perpetuating. So Rava says to him, you say from there, I say from here. You're moving down, I'm a bet, vitame tame yikra. We've actually seen some different interpretations of this pasuk. This is about the leper. And the way they interpret it here is that the leper himself has to claim, besides him being separated or she being separated from the whole thing, he has to now announce about himself that tame yikra, that he is impure. Okay, that's humiliating enough that he has to be separated. Now he has to say impure. Okay, now you're correcting. No, there's confusion here. Vayishkav Reuven Bilhah, right? He was Yishkav, right? When that was said in the pasuk. So now I see someone else is saying that it's the opposite. He moved it, which made more sense. So I was confused. So he moved it from Rachel, right? Rachel's maidservant was Bilhah. He moved it to his mother's tent. That made more sense. That's why I was okay. So hope this is all right. Sorry that my head is just not in that sugya right now. Okay, moving on. Amalei Rava Raba bar Meri. Menahamelta de Amar Rabbanan. Hashkem ve'akocho bakayet mepnei achama u'bechoref mepnei atzina. In the summer, basically eat breakfast. Breakfast is the most important part of the meal. It should be this line should be the PR campaign of Kellogg's or one of those breakfast cereal companies. Okay, you should eat early in the morning in the summer because it'll protect you from the heat. In the winter, it'll protect you from the cold. You could see the ad. There are 60 runners, but the one who's going to beat them all is the one who had breakfast in the morning. Okay, so dichtiv Lo yiravu v'lo yitzamu v'lo yakum shara v'shemesh. Okay, lo yiravu v'lo yitzamu means you won't be hungry. If you're not hungry, then lo yakem shara v'shemesh. Then the heat and the sun won't attack you. That basically means if you're not hungry, if you eat breakfast in the morning, then you won't get attacked by the elements. Again, Rava says you're going to learn it from there. I have a better pasuk. Okay, I'm going to read you the whole pasuk first. You should worship God. And he will bless your bread and your water. And I will take away sickness from your midst. So, okay, that's saying Kriyat Shema and prayer in the morning. That's your breakfast. That's, a jug of water and a loaf of bread. Okay, it wasn't cereal, so that's not going to help the cereal campaign. From here on in, right, if you do that, you pray in the morning and eat breakfast, then you'll be saved from all sorts of ailments. Vitanya, and there's a Breishit that says, machala zomara, that's bile, like the acids in your body that come from your stomach. Why is it called machala? There's 83 types of diseases that can come from it. When in fact, surprise, surprise, machala gematria is 83. That's how to get this from the bile, because there's 83 different problems you can have from it. And all of them, if you have bread with salt in the morning and a jug of water, that will cure it. Okay, there you have that one. Amalei Rava le Raba bar Meri. If your friend calls you a donkey, insults you, put the saddle on. In other words, accept okay, if they say you're bad because of blah, 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 just accept it. Don't start arguing against it. Amarle, where do we get it from? Now, this is after Hagar is chased out of the house and she's wandering in the desert and she meets the angel. And it says, Hagar shifchat sarai emi zebat va'ana telechi. The angel says to her, Hagar, the shifchat sarai. Now, she was no longer the shifchat sarai. She was kicked out. But he still called her a maidservant, even though she wasn't anymore. And what does she say? And she admits, yes, I'm running away from Sarai, the woman in charge of me. So she accepts it, okay, even though she's not really a shivcha anymore. If you have, this is similar. If you have something bad, like something, I'm trying to think of the word, but you have something not so good about yourself, some bad trait, some bad characteristic, a fault. Kadim Amra. You should just put it out there. They're using the same idea of being a maidservant or a slave as a negative thing. So Avraham, Eved Avraham, when he goes to, most people say it's Eliezer, but that's the Midrash. But when he goes, everyone knows the story is Eliezer. When Eliezer goes to Lavan's house, he says, I'm Eved Avraham. Right? When he goes to Betuel's house to find a wife, he already says it right at the beginning, I'm an Eved. Amalei Rava le Raba bar Meri. Menahamel to Amri Nashi, Shafil va'aza baravasa. The goose walks with its head down, or the duck walks with his head down, meaning in a humble manner. But his eyes look forward, like kind of look up, because usually when you walk humble, you look down. But the eyes are looking forward, searching where they're going to get their next food from. Like they're plotting in a good way already. What's this story? We're getting to all sorts of stories in Tanakh. This is Abigail. She's married to Naval. And Naval doesn't help David when he asks, and Naval is deserving of death, but she says, please don't kill him, let God take care of it. But then she says to David in this very nice, very respectful conversation where she's kind of humbling herself, she then says, but when things are good for you, remember me, right? In the end, she becomes David's wife, and she's basically plotting for her future when Naval will eventually get killed, that she has some sort of future ahead of her. And she's saying, please remember me. There's 60 kind of elements that could come to your teeth. When your friends are having a good time and you're not among them, okay, this is what we call FOMO usually, right? That you're feeling like everyone's having, everyone's over there and I'm not part of it. That causes all sorts of elements to your teeth because you want to be eating with everyone, you're not, and that ends up making your teeth kind of gives pain to your teeth. The teeth thing, they don't really prove the teeth part. They're just saying it's puts you in a bad situation. This is in the beginning of Sefer Melachim when Shlomo is supposed to take over and Adoniyahu is doing this whole rebellion, and then they say to Avimelech, we weren't called to they're having this whole big celebration and they're eating and they're celebrating Adoniyahu and they didn't invite us. Now, theoretically, they really just should have said they didn't invite Shlomo because Shlomo was the one who was supposed to be king. But they add all of us, they add all this list of people to say, it's all, we feel like we're being left out. So again, Rava says to him, you're learning it from there. I have a better one. This is actually an interesting pasuk to think about in this way. Right? This beautiful pasuk. Yitzchak brings Rivka home and she takes the place of Sarah's mother. And he brings her into the house, right? And he loves her. And he becomes consoled from his mother's death. Where is this going? Well, uktib batre, right after it says, Avraham takes another wife. Because what happened? Avraham saw Yitzchak have such a good wife, and he realized all of a sudden what he was missing. And then he goes and takes a wife. Right? It shows how painful it is to see people when all is good for them and you're struggling in your loneliness. Amar Rava, the Raba bar Meri. Chamra lemare. Here the chamra is wine. We keep using the same word. Sometimes it's a donkey, sometimes it's wine. Wine lemare. There's wine who's owned by someone, but tivuta l'shake. But the one who gets the credit is the one who pours the wine. We're now going to have when Yehoshua takes over from Moshe, and Moshe basically gives him, he does smichad, and he puts his hands on him. Now, it says, so God tells him, put your hands on Yehoshua, so that the people will see. He was filled with the Spirit of God and wisdom. Why? Well, obviously, because God gave it to him, right? But what does it say in the pasuk? Because Moshe put his hands on him. Moshe was just the conduit, but he gets the credit for it. Okay, and then and then all the Jews decide to listen to him. Rava bar Meri. A dog in his hunger will eat even dung. The satisfied soul will say, I don't even want the honey, like the sweet honey dish. But a hungry soul will even eat bitter things feeling like it's sweet. Okay, they'll eat disgusting things, even though, right? That's it's a negative about a famished person. A bad date tree is going to, like one that I guess doesn't produce a lot of fruits, will end up being in a barren field. Okay, what this basically means is an evil person will find himself among other evil people, right? That it's like poverty creates poverty. This is a little different, but it's that evil people will find like-minded people to be with. So if you have this pathetic date tree, it'll find itself in a pathetic place where nothing's really growing. This we could find in 5 different places. Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, Mishnah, Breita. Okay, we'll see Ketuvim isn't really Ketuvim, actually. It's Ben Sira, which is very interesting. That's a whole other story. What Sefer Ben Sira is, some wanted to put it part of the apocryphal literature, but it didn't make it in. However, they do call it Ketuvim here, which is just interesting in of itself. Katuv Torah, Vayelech Esav Yishmael. Okay, Esav went to Yishmael. Okay, there we have it. Like-minded. Shanoi b'nevi'im, d'chtiv v'yilaktu al Yiftach, anashim rekim v'yu imo. Okay, Yiftach was not the greatest guy as it was, and then all these other empty, nothing people ended up joining him. Umishulash b'ktuvim d'chtiv, this is from Sefer Ben Sira, called Of lemino yishkonu b'nei adam l'domeh lo. Birds will be attracted to birds like it, and people to people that are like them. T'nam b'matnitin, this is in Masechet Kelim, kolam mechubar l'tamei tamei, kolam mechubar l'tahor tahor. If it's something that's attached to something that's impure, that itself will be impure. Something attached to something that's tahor, it will be tahor. So here you see the tamei goes with the tamei, the tahor, right? It kind of they connect to each other. Tanina bebraita, Rabbi Eliezer Omer lo lachinam alach zarzir etzel orev ela mipnei shehu mino. This is an interesting discussion. It's about, is the zarzir a kosher bird or not? So they have a whole discussion. One says it's kosher, one says it's not. It's called a starling in English, and they say So Rabbi Eliezer tries to prove that it's not a kosher bird because he says he hangs out with the raven, and the raven's not a kosher bird. So here you see he's also not a kosher bird. If you call out your friend doesn't answer. You shouldn't do this if I don't return your WhatsApps all the time or something, but not always the best at that. But if somebody calls out to your friend and they don't answer, then give up on them. Rami Guda, Raba, take a big wall and throw it on them. Basically, give up on having a relationship with them. And there's a pasuk God says, because I purified you and you didn't get pure, well, I won't purify you anymore. Okay, like you lost your chance. The board that you drank from, the well that gave you water, don't curse. Yeah, we learned this from here. Okay, we have to treat the Edomites and the midstream to a certain extent in a good way because they did small things for us. This is like don't bite the hand that, usually we say don't bite the hand that feeds you, but this is don't bite the hand that fed you. Okay, past tense. If someone did something nice for you, right, don't bite their hand after. If you help me lift this, I will lift it. But if you don't help me, lo dalina, then I'm not going to do it by myself. This is a very obvious one. If you remember, Dvorah said to Barak, go out to war. And what does he say to her? If you go with me, I will go. And if you don't go with me, I won't. Meri, last one for today. When I was young, I thought I was big and strong. Now that I'm old, I'm more like a baby, okay, like a child. I've reverted. When they were in the desert, God in the beginning, when they were young, the Jewish nation, God went out and was there protecting them. And at the end, later it says, I'm only going to send a malach. Right? As they got older and you would think wiser, things got worse for them. Okay, that is the end for now. We have one more left that you'll learn tomorrow. Just a quick review. We started with this issue of the fruit trees. When are there exceptions to the rule of cutting down a fruit tree? Then we moved to this importance of asking for forgiveness from someone who, paying is not enough. You also have to ask for forgiveness. We learned that from Avimelech. From there, we got off on we darshan some psukim about Avimelech, and then we got to the first of this slew of 15 things that Rava asked Rabba bar Meri, because the first one, Rava's proof comes from the Avimelech Avraham story, that if you pray for someone about something that you need also, but you pray for someone else, you will get answered first. And from there, we got on to this whole slew of all these questions. With that, wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and also Shavua Tov coming up and B'sorot Tovot.